Coming up on Network Africa, a fuel tanker explosion near Uganda's capital leaves at least 11 people dead. Sierra Leone's President Julius Maada Bio renews call for more Africa seats at the United Nations Security Council. Plus, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa addresses BRICS member nations at the ongoing summit in Russia. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin with breaking news coming out here from Nigeria. President Bola Tinubu has sacked 5 of his ministers. Those relieved of their ministerial posts are the Minister of Women Affairs, Uju Ken Ohaneye, Minister of Tourism, Lola Ade-John, the Minister of Education, Professor Tahir Maman, and Minister of State, Housing and Urban Development, Abdullahi Mohamed Gwazo, and also the Minister of Youth Development. Will keep you updated on this story even as we get more information in the course of our bulletins. Well, let's move on to other stories. In Uganda, the death toll of a deadly fuel tanker explosion has risen to at least 11, and this includes 2 children. The incident, which occurred in the suburb of Kiguga near Uganda's capital, Kampala, has also left several others injured. The injured were taken to nearby facilities, health facilities, for treatment. According to the district police commander of Kampala Metropolitan, Moses Nanoka, the truck overturned after an accident and later exploded as residents rushed towards the vehicle with jerry cans to scoop fuel. Now, 4 buildings, houses, 9 shops were also destroyed in the explosion. Investigators are said to have collected evidence at the scene of the incident, and a probe is underway to determine if the accident was caused by the driver or the vehicle.
It was a single accident involving a fuel tanker which was moving on this Bombo Road. We have not yet ascertained whether the problem was the vehicle or the driver. It got an accident in this spot, and the fuel started oozing out from the tanker. It was unfortunate that our people went to start fetching the fuel. So, and fuel being flammable, highly flammable, it caught fire. Because there was one lady who was roasting her maize there. Then there are homesteads, like you see, shops. So with the amount of fuel which was flowing, we cannot at this time know exactly the source of the fire.
Well, joining us now is the VOA's Halima Atumani. She joins us from Kampala for more on this story. Hello, Halima. Thank you so much for your time. Tell us what the update is. We understand 11 people have been killed, and this includes 2 minors. Do we know how the tanker overturned?
So from what we gather is that the tanker was right behind another motor vehicle, which is a taxi. And you know, in Kampala or in Uganda, when you're driving, one of the things that you need to be very careful about is you driving behind a taxi. So it happened because they quickly swerve onto the roadside, you know, to pick up a passenger. So it's always very abrupt. Unfortunately for this fuel tanker driver, he was driving right behind one taxi, and the taxi guy just swerved back to the roadside, and the tanker lost control and it overturned in a place called Chigogwa along the Gulu-Kampala highway.
And it's been a little more than 24 hours since the accident, and I can imagine, there's a sense of grief in the country. Are there any other reactions to what has happened?
Definitely lots of grief, I should say, because we have tens more who have been injured and currently bedridden. But because of course you also know what happens when there's been a fire outbreak or people are burnt by fire. Many times right now we are speaking about 11 dead, but there's a possibility that maybe by the end of today or tomorrow the number is definitely going to increase because of the severity of the burns. I think the main subject that is going around at the moment has been, why do we not learn? This is not the first time that we've had a fire, a fuel tanker, overturn in the middle of the road, and then a fire breaks out. I think we had a case in 2003. We had another case in 2006, and I think for those 2 years, we had over 40 people who had been killed. So the question always is, because you know what normally happens once a fuel vehicle, overturns, the first thing people do is, run to the scene, get jerrycans, plastic jerrycans, try to fill them up. Little do they know that in a blink of an eye, this is literally a ticking bomb that, anything can go wrong in any second. And that's exactly what happened yesterday.
With accidents such as this, Halima, it brings up the question yet again about the safety of fuel transportation, protocols and procedures that should be followed. How's the government handling this? Most importantly, the action and more immediate remedies needed to prevent a recurrence. You've said it yourself that, it's not the first time.
I think this is one of a major challenge that Uganda is going to face. First and foremost, we need to know that Uganda is a landlocked country. It was until July of this year when we saw Uganda try to ship in fuel via water, via ship. I think they brought about 78 million tons of oil. But also, Uganda is surrounded by countries, again, that need fuel. So you have countries like South Sudan, you have Burundi, you have Rwanda, you have which other country? DRC. So all of their oil actually has to come all the way from Mombasa, that is at the port in Kenya, that those who use the port in Dar es Salaam from Tanzania. So for these other countries that we've just mentioned, for them to get this fuel, they have to go through Uganda. So clearly, if the government is supposed to come up with any measures, it has to be an intergovernmental measure that will probably work. I do not see any future measures being set or put in place by Uganda alone, because they have to consider all these neighboring countries for them to actually do something substantive to make sure that when fuel truck drivers are passing, there's some kind of safety measures. But also, I think the other challenge is the nature of our roads, the nature of the surroundings around our roads. If you saw the accident, it happened right in the middle of a small town. So, the buildings are very close to the road. So even when the fuel tanker overturned, it overturned right next to a shop. And these shops did not survive. So many houses were burnt with people in there. So it's something that I think the government needs to consider, but I do not see any short measures being done at the moment, unfortunately.
All right, then finally, what is the condition of those in hospital? We're hoping, they come out okay and alive.
That's the hope. But again, we are talking about fire, we are talking about fuel, we are talking about an explosion. I think as long as you're in about a distance of about maybe 100 meters or 200 meters, that explosion alone was enough to hit, people, passers-by, people who were just parked, people, and those who were even closer to the tank. You see the picture that you're showing. These are homes that were on the sides. So we're talking about severe burns. We're talking about people in pain, people who are not sure when they come back they are going to be the same people. Many are going to come out maimed. Many are going to come. It's just one of those cases where you are not sure until it is done. So I think we'll give it a few days and see how fast probably and how well the doctors are working around those who suffered injuries, and then probably come up and say, okay, now we have more survivors. But like I said in the beginning, right now we are still counting 11. The police has not yet released a new number to the to the number of victims, but I think as we're still counting 11, there's a high chance, very high possibility that numbers could probably even reach 20.
All right, then. Thank you so much. The VOA's Halima Atumani in Kampala.
Thank you for having me.
To the war in Sudan, where the armed forces, SAF, and the rival Rapid Support Forces, RSF, are defying calls for a ceasefire, with the fighting still going on across parts of the country. United Nations Deputy Spokesperson Farhan Haq says the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is deeply concerned about the impact of the war and is calling on the warring parties to ensure the protection of civilians.
Turning to Sudan, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is gravely concerned by the impact that ongoing armed conflict is having on civilians in many parts of the country. Fighting continues to rage in the states of North Darfur, West Darfur, Khartoum, North Kordofan, and Al Jazeera, despite repeated calls for the parties to de-escalate, ensure the protection of civilians, and facilitate humanitarian access. In North Darfur alone, the International Organization for Migration reports that in just 6 months, some 410,000 people have been displaced in the locality of El Fasher. Many of them had already been displaced at least once over the course of this conflict. We continue to receive reports of civilian casualties and indiscriminate attacks impacting public infrastructure and residential areas, both in North Darfur and elsewhere, with many areas effectively cut off from humanitarian assistance. Once again, OCHA calls on the parties to stop the fighting and allow humanitarian organizations to reach people in need of assistance wherever they are.
Staying with Sudan, the humanitarian situation is still in shambles as the war continues to take its toll on citizens and young children who are dying of malnutrition. At the Agiri displacement camp, many are left hopeless as they wonder where the next meal would come from. Our next report is a sad tale of a heartbroken mother who lost her child to malnutrition, even as the war brings displacement and starvation.
At midnight in early April, Zaytona Yaqub, a 37-year-old mother of 4, woke up when her sick child, 7-year-old Zaki Al-Badri, asked for food and water. When she offered him a bite, he couldn't swallow. Minutes later, he took his last breath as his body stiffened.
I carried him and ran to my neighbor. She told me, "Your son is gone."
Tears ran down Yaqub's face when remembering her son, who moved from the good life in the capital, Khartoum, in May 2023, where his breakfast was made up of grilled eggs and milk, to a displaced camp with no food but flour mixed with water that he couldn't eat for several months until he developed anemia. His skin color changed. His face and body were swollen. His mother took him from one hospital to the other, where doctors advised to carry out a blood transfusion, but the boy refused.
When the doctors asked me to offer him my blood for transfusion, or if I can buy blood bags for him, my son insisted, saying no, that I do not have enough for transfusion, more so that I needed to take care of my children.
Nearly 20 minutes walk from the IDP camp, Yaqub collapsed in tears in front of Zaki's grave, carrying his pink trousers, the only thing left of him that she had. Dr. Martin Zakaria, a physician and a native of South Kordofan's Nuba Mountains, is no stranger to death. He visits nearby villages to check on malnourished children.
The main cause of malnutrition here is insufficient food. So, and that's why the mother and the father of this child are not around. They have gone to Asol so that they can bring food for the child. They have left the mother, the grandmother, with the to take care of the child.
Dr. Zakaria said he is often forced to turn starving kids away from his rural hospital because he has no therapeutic food for treating them.
Before war, there never used to be a lot of cases of adult malnutrition. And after the war, and coupled by bad weather that we've seen in the last 2 years, we see an increased number of adult malnutrition. And this comes towards the end, in the middle of the year, from April or May up to September. That's the period where there is not enough food in the households, and they show up in the hospital when they have no other places to go. But majority of these adults are unable to come to the hospital because of being shy.
More than half the people in this nation of 50 million are suffering from severe hunger. Hundreds are estimated to be dying from starvation and hunger-related diseases each day. But life-saving international aid, cooking oil, salt, grain, lentils and more are unable to reach millions of people who desperately need it. The two warring parties, Sudan's armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, have blamed each other for hold-ups in the delivery of aid.
Welcome back to the program. We continue in Ghana, where the parliament is on suspension indefinitely following a legal battle over the House Speaker's decision to declare 4 parliamentary seats vacant. The decision, announced by Speaker Alban Baggin, effectively halts all legislative activity, and is coming less than 2 months before the country's general elections slated for December 7, and could freeze the passage of critical bills and budgetary approvals. Tuesday's adjournment was triggered by a standoff between the ruling New Patriotic Party (NPP) and the opposition National Democratic Congress (NDC), which now holds a slim majority after the defection of 4 lawmakers. Let's break this down further. Joining us is Ghanaian journalist Maxwell Agbagba, Joy News TV correspondent in Accra. Hello, Maxwell. Thank you so much for your time on the program. Well, let's understand what is happening. How did it all play out, at the on Tuesday that led to the suspension of Parliament proceedings indefinitely?
Well, like you're asking how we got to this point. Well, last week, it was announced that 4 members of parliament had changed their allegiances and would run for different parties in the upcoming December 7 general elections. Now, in response to that, the Speaker of Parliament, Alban Baggin, declared their seats vacant, citing the constitutional prohibition against MPs effective. Now, this decision, which is currently before the court, has led to the opposition National Democratic Congress becoming the majority party in a tightly divided parliament. Now, on Friday, the governing New Patriotic Party appealed to the Supreme Court of Ghana, which is the highest decision-making court, to assess whether the Speaker's interpretations of the Constitution was accurate. Now, the judges instructed the Speaker of Parliament to suspend his declaration until they reach a verdict, but the timeline for that ruling remains uncertain. Now, Tuesday was the first parliamentary session since the Supreme Court's directive. Now, during this session, MPs from both the NDC and NPP attempted to claim the seats allocated, for the majority party. Now, to prevent any potential conflict from happening, the majority leader instructed his MPs to walk out. Later, after their exit, the NDC, that's the opposition lawmakers, began singing party songs and parading around the chamber. The Speaker, when he arrived, then noted that without the members of parliament of the governing party present, there were not enough MPs to make decisions. And that led him to suspend proceedings in Parliament indefinitely.
You've mentioned that, there's no timeline now for the court's judgment, but doesn't this put this situation in limbo?
You mean the update in court?
Yes.
Yeah. So as it stands right now, the case is still in court, but the substantive matter is yet to be heard by the court. But as it stands now, the stay of execution order that was issued by the Supreme Court is still currently in force, which ties the hands of the Speaker, which also made it quite difficult for the Speaker to go ahead with his sittings on Tuesday. So as it stands now, the substantive case is yet to be heard. We do not know when that case is going to be heard. But what is in force currently is the stay of execution that was given by the Supreme Court.
And this suspension, of proceedings at the Parliament is said to have a significant impact, isn't it?
Exactly, because Parliament is important for enacting laws. There are also some agreements that need the backing, of the legislature. So there are many who are saying that this is likely going to affect, the country in terms of lawmaking decisions, and then also for approvals for some bills and then some other, important things that we need to keep, the country running. But the others who are also contending that it really wouldn't affect the country that bad because we have less than 50 days to the elections here in Ghana on December 7th. So really, there are two sides. One side saying that yes, it's going to affect the lawmaking process of the judiciary. It's also going to affect the necessary approval that has to give it to some loans. Of the others who also think that it's not really going to affect the country that much since we have less than 50 days to the elections.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Maxwell Agbagba, Joy News TV correspondent in Accra. Thank you. Well, Africa cannot wait any longer. These are the words of Sierra Leone's President, Julius Maada Bio, who continues his push for more African seats at the UN Security Council. Chairing a UN meeting convened by his country this week, President Bio pressed for a long-standing bid for African countries to get more seats, including 2 permanent and potentially veto-wielding spots. In his words, the time for half measures and incremental progress is over. Africa must be heard, and its demands for justice and equity must be met. He stresses that the African continent has been the unquestionable victim of an imbalanced, outdated, and unrepresentative Security Council structure. The president, whose country currently holds the council's rotating presidency, is urging the group to get behind giving his continent priority in any structural changes. Well, let's check in with the 3-day BRICS summit happening in Russia. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has addressed member nations, praising the bloc as an inclusive formation which reflects the agenda of the Global South. Speaking at the 16th annual summit in the city of Kazan, Mr. Ramaphosa called on BRICS member nations to recognize their full economic potential to ensure sustainable development for all. BRICS, which was founded 15 years ago by major emerging markets, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has since expanded to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates.
BRICS is an inclusive formation that has the ability to change the trajectory of the Global South. To do this, we must realize the full potential of our economic partnership to ensure sustainable development for all and not just for some. We must undertake bold steps towards a mutual, shared, and equitable prosperity for all. Like most of the world, South Africa desires the smooth operation of supply chains, trade, tourism, and financial flows free from external influence in a multipolar world. Working together, the BRICS family has an important role in addressing the key challenges of the Global South in partnership with like-minded emerging market economies. We look forward to the report that will be given by our finance ministers and central bank governors on the use of local currencies in international trade and financial transactions between BRICS members and their trading partners. A few days ago, the BRICS business entities gathered in Moscow under the stewardship of the BRICS Business Council to explore tangible trade opportunities between our countries. For South Africa, these endeavors, which are focused on practical results, are critical in addressing our country's central national priority of inclusive economic growth.
And just before we end the program, let's remind you of our breaking news coming out from Nigeria. The president, Bola Tinubu, has sacked 5 of his cabinet ministers. Those relieved of their ministerial posts are the Minister of Women Affairs, Uju Ken Ohaneye, Minister of Tourism, Lola Adejohn, Minister of Education, Professor Tahir Maman, Minister of State, Housing and Urban Development, Abdullahi Muhammad Gwazo, and Minister of Youth Development, Dr. Jamila Bio Ibrahim. We will continue to keep you updated on this developing story in the course of our bulletins. And that's where we end the program for today. Thank you so much for watching Network Africa. I'm Layo Olarinde.